She tried to destroy my life after I caught her cheating. Now she's in jail and I'm thriving. And honestly, some nights when I'm sitting in my penthouse apartment overlooking the city lights, I still can't believe how perfectly it all played out. The memory hits me like a physical blow every time I let my guard down. 3 years ago, I was supposed to be the luckiest man alive. Successful tech startup, beautiful fiancé, wedding planned down to the last detail. Sarah had this way of making everything seem perfect from the outside. Her Instagram feed was a carefully curated paradise of our supposedly perfect life together. Designer clothes, exotic vacations, candlelit dinners at restaurants I could barely afford, but paid for anyway, because seeing her smile felt worth bankrupting myself. I should have known something was wrong when she started working late more often. The signs were all there, glaring at me like neon warnings I was too blind to see. Her phone face down on the table during dinner. New lingerie I never saw her wear. That distant look in her eyes when I talked about our future. Like she was calculating something I wasn't privy to. The discovery came on a Tuesday. I remember because I'd been excited about surprising her with lunch from her favorite Thai place. My key turned in the lock of her apartment. Our apartment, technically, since I'd been paying half the rent for 8 months. And I heard sounds that made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. Not just sounds. Her voice, breathless and urgent, saying things I'd never heard her say to me. Another voice responding, deeper, unfamiliar, commanding. The bedroom door was cracked open just enough for me to see everything I never wanted to see. Sarah, my beautiful, perfect Sarah, tangled in sheets with someone who definitely wasn't me. Her back arched, her face flushed with pleasure. I realized I'd never actually given her. The man beneath her was everything I wasn't. Broad shoulders, confidence radiating from every movement. The kind of raw masculinity that made my own body feel inadequate by comparison. But it wasn't just the physical betrayal that shattered me. It was what she said next, thinking they were alone in their private bubble of deception. She was telling him about our wedding plans, laughing about them, calling me pathetic, desperate, easy to manipulate, describing in vivid detail how she was going to take me for everything I was worth in the divorce, how she'd already been documenting my business assets through photos of my laptop screen, copying client lists, building a case for community property claims that would leave me with nothing. The Thai food containers slipped from my numb fingers, hitting the hardwood floor with a sound that might as well have been a gunshot. They both froze. Sarah's eyes met mine through that crack in the door, and for one crystalline moment, I saw her calculating. Not shame, not regret. Strategy. I should have confronted them, should have stormed in, demanded answers, made a scene. Instead, I backed away slowly, my whole body trembling like I was in shock, because I was in shock. The woman I'd been planning to marry, the woman I'd reorganized my entire life around, had been systematically planning my destruction while I paid for her lifestyle and dreamed about our future children. I made it to my car before the shaking turned violent, gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went white, staring at nothing while my mind tried to process the magnitude of what I just witnessed. 26 months of my life, 2 years of believing in something that had never been real. My phone buzzed with a text from her. Can't wait to see you tonight, baby. Love you so much. The casual cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. She was going to look me in the eye, kiss me hello, and pretend she hadn't just been planning my financial and emotional annihilation while wrapped around another man. I drove home in a haze, muscle memory guiding me through traffic while my brain struggled to function. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked like a stranger. Pale, hollow-eyed, aged about 5 years in the space of 20 minutes. I'd built my entire adult identity around being Sarah's boyfriend, then fiancé. Without that, who was I? The apartment we'd been planning to move into together after the wedding suddenly felt like a mausoleum. Wedding magazines on the coffee table, engagement photos on the mantle, a framed picture of us from last Christmas, both of us smiling like we had the world figured out. I wanted to sweep it all into the trash, but my arms felt too heavy to move. Instead, I sat on the couch and stared at nothing while the sun moved across the room. Hours passed. My phone kept buzzing with increasingly frantic messages from Sarah, wondering where I was, if I was okay, reminding me we had dinner reservations at 8. At 7:30, she used her key to let herself in. I heard her heels clicking across the hardwood, that familiar rhythm that used to make my heart race with anticipation. Now it sounded like a countdown to execution. She found me sitting in the dark, still wearing my work clothes, probably looking like I'd seen a ghost, which in a way I had, the ghost of everything I'd thought was real. Her performance was flawless. Concern creasing her perfect features, rushing to turn on lights, kneeling beside me with her hands on my face, asking what was wrong, if something had happened at work, whether I was sick. The same hands that had been all over another man 6 hours earlier, now touching me with false tenderness that made my skin crawl. I wanted to scream at her, wanted to grab her shoulders and shake her until she admitted what she was doing to me. But something cold and calculating was already forming in the back of my mind. A voice that sounded like my father teaching me chess when I was 12. Never let your opponent know you've seen their strategy until you're ready to destroy them. So I manufactured a smile and told her I was just stressed about work. Let her fuss over me, order takeout instead of going to the restaurant, curl up against me on the couch while we watched Netflix. Her body felt foreign now, like I was cuddling with a beautiful, deadly snake. Every casual touch, every soft word, every concerned glance was just another layer of manipulation I was finally seeing clearly. That night, she fell asleep with her head on my chest, breathing peacefully like she hadn't spent the afternoon betraying everything we'd built together. I stared at the ceiling for hours, feeling her heartbeat against my ribs, wondering how many other nights she'd lain there planning my destruction while I held her like she was precious. Sleep, when it finally came, brought dreams of falling. Endless falling through darkness while Sarah's laughter echoed around me, getting smaller and smaller until I couldn't tell if it was real or just the sound of my own heart breaking. I woke up before dawn with perfect clarity. She wanted to destroy my life? Fine. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated me. The next few weeks were the hardest acting job of my life. I had to pretend everything was normal, while my entire worldview restructured itself around this new, terrible knowledge. Sarah continued her double life with apparent ease, dividing her time between playing the devoted fiancé and whatever she was doing with her secret lover. I started noticing patterns I'd been blind to before. Nights she claimed to be with girlfriends but came home smelling like unfamiliar cologne. Phone calls she took in other rooms. Sudden interest in my business finances disguised as cute couple conversations about our future. The worst part was how good she was at it. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I never would have suspected. She made love to me with the same passion as always, planned our wedding with the same enthusiasm, talked about our future children with the same dreamy expression. Either she was a complete sociopath or I'd never really known her at all. Both possibilities terrified me. I started doing research. Not the kind of frantic, emotional digging you do when you first suspect infidelity, but systematic, methodical investigation. I was a tech entrepreneur. Data analysis was literally my profession. If Sarah wanted to play games, I'd play them better than she ever imagined possible. First, I traced her digital footprint, logged into our shared phone plan, and pulled detailed records of her calls and texts, cross-referenced locations from her social media posts with cell tower data, built a timeline of her movements that painted a picture so damning it made my stomach hurt. She wasn't just cheating, she was living an entirely separate life. The man's name was Marcus. 34, divorced, owned a successful construction company. She'd been seeing him for 7 months, which meant she'd been planning our wedding while carrying on this elaborate affair. Some of their text exchanges made me physically ill. Not just the sexual content, but the way she talked about me. Like I was a pathetic ATM she was stringing along until she could access my accounts legally. But that wasn't even the worst of it. Digging deeper into her communications, I found evidence of something much more sinister. Sarah hadn't just been documenting my business assets for a potential divorce settlement. She'd been stealing them. Client lists, proprietary software code, business strategies. She'd been systematically copying everything and sending it to a competitor who'd been trying to acquire my company for months. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I actually laughed when I found the smoking gun emails. A harsh, bitter sound that echoed in my empty apartment like a death rattle. She wasn't just planning to leave me brokenhearted. She was planning to leave me financially ruined. I sat back in my desk chair, staring at the evidence spread across my monitors, and felt something shift inside me. The grief and shock were still there, but underneath them, something colder was crystallizing. Sarah had declared war on me without me even knowing we were fighting. She'd been playing chess while I was playing checkers, systematically positioning herself to destroy every aspect of my life. Time to show her what happened when you underestimated a man who built his fortune by being smarter than everyone else in the room. My father always told me that revenge was a dish best served cold, but he'd never met Sarah. She was the kind of person who would burn down your house and then offer to sell you a fire extinguisher. Subtlety would be wasted on her. She understood only power, manipulation, and consequences. Fine, I'd speak her language. The plan began forming in my mind like a complex algorithm, each piece clicking into place with satisfying precision. Sarah thought she was playing me, but she'd made a fatal error in her calculations. She'd assumed I was the same naive, trusting man she'd been manipulating for 2 years. She had no idea that catching her had been like a cold shower, washing away every ounce of willful blindness I'd been clinging to. Phase 1 was information gathering. I needed to document everything, not just for my own emotional processing, but because what she was doing to me might very well be illegal. Corporate espionage, at minimum, possibly fraud, depending on how she'd accessed my business information. I started keeping detailed logs of her activities, backing up every piece of digital evidence to multiple secure servers. Phase 2 was building my case. I reached out to my lawyer, not the one handling our wedding contracts, but a different one who specialized in corporate litigation. Presented the evidence without emotion, like I was discussing someone else's life entirely. Watched his eyebrows climb higher and higher as he reviewed the documentation of Sarah's systematic theft of my intellectual property. The conversation that followed was one of the most satisfying 30 minutes of my life. Not only was Sarah's behavior clearly illegal, but the competitor she'd been feeding information to had apparently been building their entire business strategy around stolen data from my company. We weren't just talking about personal betrayal anymore. We were talking about felony corporate espionage with damages potentially in the millions. My lawyer's eyes lit up like Christmas morning when he realized the scope of what we were dealing with. Sarah had essentially handed us a federal case on a silver platter, complete with digital evidence, paper trails, and documented communication between all parties involved. But I wasn't ready to pull that trigger yet. Sarah wanted to destroy my life slowly, savoring every moment of my ignorance while she positioned herself for maximum damage. I decided she deserved the same courtesy. Phase 3 was the most delicate part of the operation, maintaining my cover while gathering additional evidence. I had to continue playing the devoted fiancé while secretly building a case that would destroy her completely. It was like method acting, except the stakes were my entire future. I got better at it than I expected. Maybe seeing her true nature had immunized me against her manipulations. Or maybe I just discovered a talent for deception I never knew I possessed. Either way, I found I could look her in the eye over dinner and smile while mentally cataloging which of her lies I'd be using to put her in prison. The hardest part was the physical intimacy. She still expected our relationship to continue normally, which meant I had to pretend to want her while knowing exactly what kind of person she really was. Those nights were exercises in self-control that left me feeling hollow and vaguely nauseated, but they were also opportunities to access her phone, her laptop, her personal files. Sarah was sloppy with digital security, another mistake that would cost her dearly. She used the same password for everything, kept detailed records of her own criminal activity, and apparently never considered that her devoted, trusting fiancé might one day turn those careful records against her. By the end of month 2, I had enough evidence to put her away for years, but I still wasn't satisfied. She'd hurt me on every possible level, emotionally, financially, professionally, personally. A simple arrest felt insufficient for the scope of her crimes against my life. I wanted her to understand exactly what she'd done to me. Wanted her to feel the same sick realization I'd felt that day in her apartment, watching everything I'd believed in crumble into dust. So I kept gathering evidence, kept playing the part of the clueless fiancé, kept letting her think she was the smartest person in our relationship, while I built a case that would end her freedom and her future in one devastating blow. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd been so focused on stealing my business secrets that she'd never bothered to research what I was actually capable of when properly motivated. Sarah saw me as a soft target, a successful but naive man she could manipulate and discard at will. She was about to learn how wrong she'd been. Meanwhile, my business was thriving despite her attempts at sabotage. Knowing about the corporate espionage let me feed false information to the competitor through Sarah's unwitting cooperation, leading them to make strategic decisions based on completely fabricated data. They launched a product that was 6 months behind mine technologically, marketed to completely wrong demographics, priced at levels that guaranteed failure. Watching their company implode while mine soared felt like poetic justice. They thought they were buying stolen secrets that would give them a competitive advantage. Instead, they'd paid for the privilege of destroying themselves with false intelligence. Sarah, meanwhile, was growing increasingly frustrated with my apparent success, despite what she assumed was her successful sabotage. I could see her calculating, trying to figure out why her corporate espionage wasn't yielding the results she'd expected. Sometimes I caught her staring at me with a puzzled expression, like I was the equation she couldn't solve. If only she knew how right she was. Month 3 brought an unexpected development that changed everything. Sarah announced she was pregnant. The timing was suspicious, to say the least. We'd been careful about protection, and the pregnancy conveniently coincided with her growing impatience about my continued business success. But what really made my blood run cold was the possibility that the child might not even be mine. I handled the announcement with appropriate enthusiasm while internally screaming. If she was pregnant with Marcus's child and trying to pass it off as mine, the level of her deception reached heights I hadn't thought possible. If it was actually mine, then I was looking at 18 years of being connected to a woman who'd already proven she was willing to destroy me for personal gain. Either way, the pregnancy added a new dimension to the situation that required careful consideration. I wasn't about to let Sarah trap me with a child that might not be mine, but I also wasn't going to punish an innocent baby for its mother's crimes. I started researching paternity testing options while maintaining my facade of excitement about our growing family. Sarah's behavior during this period became even more calculating, if that was possible. She started talking about marriage timelines, suggesting we move up the wedding before she started showing, pushing for joint bank accounts and shared business assets for the baby's security. The pregnancy also seemed to embolden her espionage activities. Maybe she thought having leverage over me through a potential child made her untouchable, or maybe she was just getting careless with success. Either way, she became sloppy about covering her tracks, making my evidence gathering even easier. By month 4, I had enough documentation to destroy not just Sarah, but the entire network of people she'd been working with. The competitor company's executives, Marcus, who apparently had his own side business selling corporate intelligence, and several other players I hadn't even known existed. But the pregnancy complicated everything. If Sarah was arrested while pregnant, there would be questions about the baby's welfare, media attention, public sympathy for a victimized, pregnant woman. The optics alone could undermine the strength of my case. I needed to wait until after the birth to make my move, which meant at least 5 more months of pretending to be excited about starting a family with a woman who was systematically destroying my life while carrying a child that might belong to her criminal associate. The waiting was torture. Every day brought new evidence of her crimes, new lies I had to pretend to believe, new demonstrations of her complete lack of regard for my well-being. She'd started pushing for more access to my business operations, claiming she wanted to be more involved now that we were starting a family together. Her attempts at manipulation were so transparent, I almost admired their audacity. Almost. What kept me sane during this period was the certainty that justice was coming. Every lie she told, every document she stole, every night she came home from Marcus's bed and kissed me hello. All of it was adding to the final reckoning that would destroy her completely. I started making preparations for the aftermath, secured my business assets in ways that would protect them from any legal challenges, documented every penny she'd cost me through her industrial espionage, built relationships with federal prosecutors who specialize in corporate crime, created backup plans for every possible scenario, including what would happen if the baby turned out to be mine. The pregnancy progressed normally, and Sarah seemed to be enjoying her role as an expectant mother. She documented everything on social media, painting a picture of a blissful couple preparing for their first child. The comments from friends and family about how lucky we were, how beautiful our life looked, how excited they were for our future. They felt like daggers every time I read them. If only they knew what was really happening behind the carefully curated facade. Month 7 brought the paternity test results. I'd managed to get Sarah's DNA from a discarded coffee cup and compared it to samples I'd taken from Marcus's construction site. The baby was mine. Relief and terror warred in my chest as I processed this information. Relief because it meant I wouldn't have to deal with the complication of exposing Marcus as the father during legal proceedings. Terror because it meant I was genuinely connected to Sarah forever through this child, no matter how thoroughly I destroyed her life. But it also crystallized my resolve. This baby deserved better than a mother who was a criminal and a father who was too weak to protect them from her. Sarah had forfeited her right to be a parent the moment she decided to systematically destroy the man who was supposed to be her child's father. The final months of pregnancy were surreal. Sarah grew more beautiful and more terrible simultaneously. her body nurturing new life while her mind continued plotting my destruction. She'd started talking about me taking a step back from my business after the baby was born, suggesting I hire her as a consultant to help manage things while I focused on being a father. The sheer audacity of it took my breath away. She was literally proposing that I pay her to complete the destruction of my company while she raised our child. It was like watching someone try to sell you a knife to stab yourself with. But I smiled and told her it was something to consider. Played the part of the devoted partner who was so excited about fatherhood that he'd do anything to make his growing family happy. Meanwhile, I was putting the finishing touches on a legal case that would ensure our child never had to grow up thinking their mother was anything other than a criminal who'd made terrible choices. The baby was born on a Tuesday, the same day of the week I'd discovered Sarah's initial betrayal, which felt like the universe maintaining some kind of cosmic balance. Our daughter was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, Sarah's eyes, but thankfully my stubborn chin. Holding her for the first time, I felt a love so fierce it physically hurt, coupled with a protective rage that made my hands shake. This tiny, innocent person was now caught in the middle of a war she hadn't asked to be part of. But she was also my motivation to end that war decisively. Sarah had shown me exactly what kind of person she was willing to be. I couldn't let our daughter grow up thinking that behavior was normal or acceptable. 2 weeks after the birth, Sarah was back to her old tricks. The brief softness of new motherhood evaporated as she returned to pressuring me about business decisions, pushing for access to accounts and systems, making increasingly bold moves to position herself for maximum financial gain when she inevitably destroyed our relationship. She'd started talking about postnatal depression as an excuse for mood swings that were really frustration about my continued resistance to her manipulation. The way she weaponized mental health terminology while systematically committing federal crimes made me physically ill. But it also provided the perfect cover for what came next. I'd been in communication with federal prosecutors for months, building a case that was now airtight. Sarah's crimes weren't just personal betrayals anymore. They represented a pattern of industrial espionage that had cost multiple companies millions of dollars in damages. The scope of her criminal enterprise was actually larger than I'd initially realized, involving several competitors and a network of corporate spies that had been operating for years. The FBI had been investigating the broader network based on my initial evidence. Sarah wasn't just a cheating fiancé who'd stolen some business secrets. She was a central figure in an organized crime operation that specialized in corporate espionage and intellectual property theft. When they arrested her, it was with a warrant that covered federal racketeering charges, conspiracy, wire fraud, money laundering, and about 12 other felonies I couldn't even pronounce. The bail was set at $2 million, money she definitely didn't have, since most of her lifestyle had been funded by my income, and her criminal activities had been more about corporate sabotage than personal enrichment. I was at work when it happened, surrounded by witnesses who could testify that I'd had no advanced knowledge of the timing. My surprise and devastation were completely genuine, not because I didn't know it was coming, but because seeing it actually happen was still shocking after months of anticipation. The media coverage was extensive. Corporate espionage rings always make good headlines, especially when they involve beautiful young mothers and successful tech entrepreneurs. Sarah's mugshot was on the front page of every business publication in the country. Her social media accounts dissected for clues about how a seemingly normal woman had become the center of a federal criminal investigation. The baby and I were portrayed as victims, which was accurate enough. The narrative became about a trusting businessman who'd been manipulated and betrayed by the woman he loved, who'd used their intimate relationship to gain access to corporate secrets worth millions of dollars. What the media didn't know, what nobody knew except me and my lawyer, was how long I'd known about Sarah's activities before taking action. The timeline in the public record made it look like I'd discovered her crimes and immediately contacted authorities. The truth was much more complex, but also much more damaging to Sarah's potential defense strategies. Her arrest was just the beginning of her problems. The federal investigation had uncovered evidence of crimes spanning multiple states in several years. The corporate espionage network she'd been part of had cost dozens of companies hundreds of millions in damages. Sarah wasn't just facing time in federal prison, she was facing decades. Meanwhile, I was experiencing an unexpected emotion, relief so profound it felt like being reborn. The constant stress of maintaining my facade, the exhaustion of pretending to love someone who was systematically destroying me, The weight of carrying such devastating secrets, all of it lifted the moment Sarah was led away in handcuffs. For the first time in almost a year, I could breathe freely. The legal proceedings moved faster than I'd expected. Federal prosecutors had been building cases against the entire espionage network for months, using my evidence as a cornerstone, but expanding far beyond Sarah's individual crimes. When faced with the scope of the charges and the strength of the evidence, most of the co-conspirators started negotiating plea deals that implicated each other in increasingly damaging ways. Sarah's lawyer tried to paint her as a victim of manipulation by Marcus and the other men involved in the operation. The strategy might have worked if I hadn't documented her role as a central coordinator rather than a passive participant. She wasn't just stealing information. She was directing other people's theft activities, managing distribution of stolen data, and taking percentages of the profits from successful operations. The woman who'd convinced me she was too sweet and innocent to handle our joint tax filings had actually been running a sophisticated criminal enterprise that spanned multiple industries. Her trial was set for 8 months after her arrest. Plenty of time for me to rebuild my life and establish a stable environment for our daughter. The baby was too young to understand why mommy wasn't coming home, but old enough to benefit from having a parent who wasn't constantly stressed about maintaining criminal conspiracies. I threw myself into single parenthood with the same methodical precision I'd used to build my business and destroy Sarah's criminal operation. Hired the best nanny money could buy, baby-proofed my apartment, learned to function on 3 hours of sleep while still running a multi-million-dollar company. The irony wasn't lost on me that Sarah's arrest had actually benefited my business. The media attention, while stressful personally, had positioned me as a sympathetic figure who'd overcome incredible adversity. Clients who might have been suspicious of my company's rapid growth were now actively rooting for my success. The corporate espionage scandal had also eliminated several competitors whose businesses had been built on stolen intelligence rather than legitimate innovation. My company's valuation tripled in the 6 months following Sarah's arrest. Sarah herself wasn't handling imprisonment well, according to the reports I received from my lawyer. She'd tried to negotiate a plea deal by offering information about other criminal enterprises, but her credibility had been so thoroughly destroyed by the evidence of her manipulation that prosecutors weren't interested in her cooperation. She'd also tried to claim that her actions had been motivated by postpartum depression, despite the fact that her criminal activities had begun long before her pregnancy. The timeline I'd so carefully documented made it impossible for her to claim mental illness as mitigation for crimes that clearly predated any possible psychological complications from childbirth. Her final strategy was trying to use our daughter as leverage for a reduced sentence. The argument was that a lengthy prison term would harm an innocent child by separating her from her mother. It was typical Sarah logic, using the baby she'd endangered through her criminal activities as a shield against the consequences of those same activities. The judge wasn't impressed. Sarah was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison on charges including racketeering, conspiracy, wire fraud, and corporate espionage. With good behavior, she might be eligible for parole in 12 years. Our daughter would be in middle school before her mother could potentially be released. I felt nothing when the sentence was announced. Not satisfaction, not sadness, not relief. Just a kind of numb acknowledgement that justice had been served according to the law. Sarah had systematically destroyed trust, stolen millions of dollars worth of intellectual property, and planned to leave me financially and emotionally ruined. 15 years seemed proportional to the scope of her crimes. The aftermath was strange and peaceful. For the first time in years, I could make decisions without wondering what Sarah's hidden agenda might be. Could trust my instincts without second-guessing whether I was being manipulated. Could focus on building a life for my daughter without constantly defending against sabotage from the person who should have been my partner in that effort. My business continued thriving. The daughter Sarah had planned to use as leverage for financial gain became my motivation for building something even bigger and more successful than I'd originally dreamed. Every milestone in her development, first smile, first word, first step, happened in an environment free from the toxic stress that had defined our household when Sarah was actively destroying our lives. I never took her to visit Sarah in prison. Call it selfish. But I couldn't see any benefit to exposing an innocent child to the reality of what her mother had become. When she's old enough to ask questions, I'll tell her the truth in age-appropriate ways. But for now, she's growing up knowing only love, stability, and the kind of security that comes from having a parent who isn't constantly planning to betray everyone around them. Sarah sends letters occasionally, forwarded through my lawyer. They're mostly attempts at emotional manipulation disguised as maternal concern, claims that she's changed, that prison has given her perspective, that she deserves a relationship with her daughter regardless of what she did to me. I read them once and filed them away. Evidence of a person who still doesn't understand that actions have consequences. The letters never mention remorse for what she did to me, only regret that she got caught. 2 years later, I sold my company for more money than I'd ever imagined possible. The buyer was actually one of the competitors who'd been targeted by Sarah's espionage network. They were so impressed by my success, despite systematic sabotage, that they wanted to acquire not just my technology, but my entire approach to business development. The sale freed me to focus entirely on being a father and exploring new ventures without the constant pressure of running day-to-day operations. I bought a house in the mountains, far from the city where Sarah and I had lived our elaborate charade of a relationship. Started a small investment firm that focuses on helping other entrepreneurs protect themselves from the kind of corporate espionage that had nearly destroyed me. My daughter is 3 now, healthy and happy and surrounded by people who love her unconditionally. She has Sarah's eyes but my stubborn streak, which means she's going to be formidable when she grows up. I'm teaching her chess the way my father taught me. Not just the moves, but the strategy, the patience, the importance of seeing several steps ahead. She doesn't know it yet, but she's already better at reading people than I was at her age. Maybe that's natural development, or maybe it's inherited wisdom from having a father who learned the hard way that trust has to be earned rather than freely given. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd confronted Sarah immediately when I caught her cheating. If I'd stormed into that bedroom, demanded explanations, tried to save our relationship through counseling or ultimatums or whatever other approaches people use when they discover infidelity. The answer's obvious. She would have destroyed me anyway, just faster and more completely. Sarah wasn't cheating because she was unhappy or unfulfilled or going through a rough patch. She was systematically dismantling my life while pretending to build a future with me. Confronting her directly would have simply accelerated her timeline for maximum damage. Instead, she underestimated me long enough for me to document her crimes and build a case that ensured she'd face real consequences for her actions. She tried to destroy my life, but ended up destroying her own instead. The irony is that Sarah got exactly what she deserved, just not in the way she expected. She wanted power, control, and financial gain through manipulation and betrayal. Instead, she got 15 years in federal prison and a daughter who will grow up knowing that actions have consequences. Meanwhile, I'm thriving in ways I never imagined possible when I was pretending to be the devoted fiancé of a woman who was planning my destruction. My business success, my relationship with my daughter, my ability to trust my own judgment, all of it is stronger because I learned to see clearly what people are actually capable of when they think they're smarter than everyone else. Sarah tried to destroy my life after I caught her cheating. Instead, she taught me that I'm capable of playing chess at a level I never knew existed, and that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people face the natural consequences of their own choices. Now she's in jail, and I'm thriving, and our daughter is growing up in a world where love doesn't come with hidden agendas, and family doesn't mean constant warfare. Some nights when I'm reading bedtime stories to a little girl who trusts me completely, I almost feel grateful to Sarah for showing me exactly how strong I could be when properly motivated. Almost,